Major, love you. Can I tell you guys that this woman is amazing? Amazing woman. Amazing what God is doing in her life. Yes.
Who is?
Okay, Pastor Yolanda, good to see you as well. Neil's not joining us, correct? So,
Yeah.
Kevin, will you open us up in prayer?
You bet. Father in heaven, we thank you and we praise you
You're
for
on
another
mute, sir.
year. We thank you, Father, for this blessed year of 2023.
Kevin,
Yeah.
you got to unmute your phone here so we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Bad, my bad. Here it is. Okay. Let's do it again. Father in heaven, we're so grateful and thankful that you've given us the privilege of prayer. You've given us the privilege of seeing another year. Thank you for 2023, and we thank you for all that you will do, all that you've already begun to do, and all that will manifest in this year for us individually and collectively. We ask, Father, that as we go through this conversation today, that you would be with us, that you would guide the talking points, guide the mood and the perspectives on this discussion, and we ask that you would be glorified. So, Father, have your will and your way, and we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So welcome, everyone. And our topic today is Darwin and the pioneering of the War on Woman.
Yeah.
And so Kevin wrote a great book called The War on Woman. And Lonnie is going to be our reader today and facilitating the room. So, gentlemen, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Regina. I kind of feel like I'm sitting in Captain Kirk's chair with you allowing me to speak today. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of our listenership out there across this great nation, across this globe that are listening in as well. So it's from chapter 7. If you have a copy of Kevin's book, and if you don't have a copy of this book, you need to get your hands on one. You can go to Amazon and get and order it. You can go to our website and we'll direct you toward ordering it as well. But it's Woke Up, Finally Putting an Axe to the Taproot of White Supremacy and Racism in America by Kevin Gary, who is our fearless leader with our organization. And, Kevin, you like to say that you've when you hone in to write a book, you get directions from on high, from the holy throne room, and I would agree with you in that assertion, and that this book is really on point with dialing in into the taproot of who the real culprits are, or the bad guys, if you will, with white supremacy and racism. And for those of you who are just tuning in, you'll be amazed as to how things all lead back to one individual. I had no idea. I thought I was well versed in all of this, but from reading Kevin's book and associating with him and Neil and others that are privy to the origins of all of this, it leads back to one individual, Charles Darwin. Amazing how one person can have such impact on society based upon flawed science. So we'll dig in. I'm going to read this particular paragraph, and then we'll take questions, and Kevin can add perspective as well. Darwin was a scientist and naturalist. Naturalists rely heavily on natural observable phenomena to make assessments. To this end, Darwin made assertions about cranial size in order to confirm observations and assessments about brain size and respective intellectual function. Fundamentally, he wanted to arrive at a scientific rationale for determining intellect. These experiments were conducted to help distinguish between races and biological genders. Regrettably, Darwin's theories along these lines were flawed. Boy, that's an understatement there, Kevin. It produced conclusions about women that were flawed and about women, and only much later were determined to be far off base. Taken at face value, however, these findings gave rise to sexism and misogyny. acceleration of the abuse and defamation of women was a natural byproduct of these theories. This was an aha moment for me, Kevin, when you drew the lines and connected the dots as to the scientific community, because of Darwin giving credence to and justification for misogyny based on flawed science. What were your thoughts originally when you came to this conclusion when you were doing your research for this book?
I was really like you were. I was.
Is he on mute? Oh, there we go.
Like you were, I was really surprised.
Yeah.
I had no idea that Darwin was such a nefarious, pathetic, grotesque, hateful individual. I didn't know. So when I started to do the research, I realized he did this research, and he actually wanted to have justification to relegate women to lesser than status. That's when I began to say, man, this guy was he didn't just provide justification for atheism, provide justification for white supremacy, provide justification for racism, provide justification for eugenics, provide justification for all these other things. He went further and said, look, and on the subject of women, here's the deal. I've taken a look and I've seen that their physiology is much less and different than males. And at the end of the day, he came up with he concocted a scheme like he did with racism to relegate women and subjugate women. And so this is what's startling is you have all of these feminists, radical feminists, all of them, 100% are on the left, radical feminists. And that means that they subscribe to Marxism, which fundamentally is rooted in Darwinism. So they subscribe to their own demise. These mindsets are the mindsets that actually promote misogyny and sexism. Now, I remember just a few years ago, they were having marches about toxic masculinity and a past president because he said some grotesque things that they didn't like. But these are the same individuals that will herald and applaud social Darwinism and Marxism.
Yes.
So this is just all upside down.
It certainly is. It's akin. I was thinking of seeing those who happen to have the darker paint job wearing T-shirts, Che Guevara T-shirts. When if you read the history of Che Guevara, he was he's a racist about on the level of Charles Darwin. But you're wearing T-shirts. It's showing a kinship to Che Guevara because you think he's a revolutionary and about change, and the kind of change he had in mind was not too good for folks of us who look like us, right, Kevin?
Exactly right. These same individuals will march around and socially preen and virtue signal about Che and about these other characters. And these characters were hateful racists, all of them. Darwin, Marx, Che. Terrible. Terrible.
In fact, Che was so bad that even Fidel Castro had to march.
Are you there, Lonnie? Hello?
Darwin's views on gender were equally benighted. In Descent of Man, Darwin referred to men's superior inventive genius, in quotes, over women because of their absolutely larger brains, he concluded.
Can I ask, Lonnie, I'm sorry for the interruption. I apologize, Lonnie. But we kind of lost you for a little bit there. So can you start from again? And because we lost you for about 15, 20 seconds.
Oh, okay. No problem. I'll start reading from Michael Flannery. Michael Flannery summarizes Darwin's profound sexism as follows. Darwin's views on gender were equally benighted. In Descent of Man, Darwin referred to men's superior inventive genius, and this is in quotes, over women because of their absolutely larger brains. He continued, the chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man's attaining a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than, lost my place here, takes up other than attaining a higher eminence, and whatever it takes up than women. I'm reading here from the book. Whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of the senses and hands, if two lists were made of the most eminent men and women in poetry, painting, sculpture, music, inclusive both of compositional and performance, history, and science, philosophy, with a half dozen names under each subject, the two lists would not bear comparison. Just straight up, it's flawed science. But his ability to gain acceptance of this thought process is amazing, and how it propagated throughout the nation and throughout a portion of the world. And I have a little bit of a bad connection here, folks. So if you cannot hear me, let me know, and I'll read this again. The good old internet is doing its thing.
Yeah.
So,
but can I chime in here real quick?
Sure.
You're absolutely right. It was bad science. What Darwin did not take into consideration is the fact that physiologically women have a smaller frame, generally, and so there's some real obvious physiological differences. So for him to go into the cranial cavity and do an analysis based upon the cranial size, and then therefore assess that your intellectual capacity is far more diminished because your cranial size is diminished. It's absolute flawed science. It's not even science. It's just a crazy theory and hypothesis. That was never, it's of course not true. And it really exacerbated the plight of women at that time because he was so well heralded and respected.
On point, brother. On point. You know, Kevin, as I think about this, when you start to move away from understanding that the Word of God is, in fact, the benchmark that you should judge everything against, then you can go down this primrose path to hell, if I can be blunt, of these types of mindsets. So, in essence, what he's doing, talking about brain size, and brain size determines someone's intellect. And they use this when they look to depict the intelligence of animals. And what they like to do is say, because we're supposedly mammals, we're no different than chimpanzees, gorillas, dogs, fish, or anything else that has living breath within it. So we can determine based on the model of the brain size on those animals, if our brain should be depicted as whether we're have an intelligence level. And it bothers me because it goes against what I call common sense. We're not like animals. We are human beings created by a heavenly Father who created us in his image. So to try to use animals to depict what level of intellect we have, I think is preposterous. But when you move down this path, this is what you end up on, and this is where Darwin was going. Amen. So if those of you who have any questions or any comments, please chime in. Let us know. Regina will show me how to pull you up into the app so that you can speak on this topic. Let me read on. Of course, Darwin never considered that men dominated these fields, and within Victorian patriarchal society, most women would have been precluded from entry in the first place. Darwin's list merely reflects prevailing cultural prejudices, not inherent science-based capacities. And there's Darwin again used the power and authority of his scientific proclamations to conveniently prop up superiority themes that buttress patriarchy while undermining humanity. This time, the target of Darwin's unscientific theories and conclusions was women. Interesting, very interesting. So, as you stated earlier, Kevin, the ultra feminist groups that all lean way left have aligned themselves with an individual that sees them as inferior. I mean, it's amazing to see that took place. But I would be so bold as to say most of these individuals have not done their homework. Would you agree?
That's just like all of the other arguments in Woke Up. I mean, the wokesters need to be truly woke up in the sense that they need to do their homework. They need to find out what they stand for and why they stand there. They need to do the history. They need to understand where toxic masculinity came from figures like Darwin and then Marx after him. He was horrible to women, just absolutely horrible. So when you have these women, aggressively postulating that they're a proud Marxist, these people are just, for us who have done the reading and the research, we look at them like you're buffoons. You're being used as a useful idiot. You're a tool, because that's what it is. There's no other way around it. I mean, I like to say some nicer things, but for anybody who would agree with such egregious theories, philosophies, pseudoscience, that's the only label that you could say is, look, you're a useful idiot, meaning that you're going to do whatever along with basically a useful idiot. And I classify it in the book as somebody, Lenin classified it, characterized it as somebody who would be willing to reject their own founding, their own principles, their own personal integrity, and fall all in with a cultural movement or a moment. So they would actually literally reject faith foundations and other moral leanings and other things like that. But in order to embrace, a momentum of culture or other types of movements. And those are useful idiots. Now, the entire woke movement today, I can say, fits that description. All useful idiots. Because if they knew what Darwin said about women, about blacks, about, if they knew what Marx said about blacks and Cubans and Jews, if they knew these things, then you got to believe that they wouldn't be all in and just overboard with trying to support these crazy theories that are antithetical and anti-human, and that. So bottom line is we have a culture today made up of really smart but misguided females, women. And because of that, they don't even know that they're embracing their own demise. They're embracing, when they embrace Darwin, when they embrace Marx, even when they embrace the trans movement, they are embracing the demise of what it means to be a woman. And it's really a bizarre moment, really. So, yeah, that's all I had to say about you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Regina.
What I think we're getting to, and I want to make sure that we make it clear. There was Darwin's impact on the women's suffrage movement.
Yes.
Right. And so that's kind of where we get what is our modern day women's rights, right? Started from women's suffrage.
Yep.
And so if we can, I'm not sure what page it is on your book, Lonnie, because we have two different versions, but it's Darwin's insidious impact on the women's suffrage movement. I think that that's a good place to really read a couple paragraphs, and then we can really dig into how women's rights movement started because of Darwin's work.
Great point, Regina, great point. That's on page 97 if you have the latest version of Kevin's book. And let me jump into that now. Darwin's insidious impact on women's suffrage. The war on women prompted by Darwin made women fight for equal rights during the women's suffrage movement. Women had to combat in a war unleashed by Darwin, purported scientific confirmation and explanation of their supposed intellectual deficiencies. With evident hostilities, hatred, and notable enemies, including laws and precedents targeted at women, women's suffrage was seen and internalized as an actual battle and war. Let me read on. One example that demonstrates how women internalized their fight and plight in the battle for women appears in the popular 1964 movie, Mary Poppins. Now, this was eye-opening for me. Let me read on, where Mrs. Banks sang, "We're clearly soldiers in petticoats and dauntless crusaders for women's votes. Though we adore men individually, we agree that as a group, they're rather stupid. Cast off the shackles of yesterday, shoulder to shoulder into the fray. Our daughters will adore us, and they'll sing in grateful chorus. Well done, sister suffrage." No thanks to Darwin or his disciples, the suffrage movement gained great support worldwide, creating a push to amend the U.S. Constitution. That's a really interesting point. Kevin, you have any comments on that?
Yeah. So what exacerbated the women's? So because when you look back at history, you say, okay, we had this Civil War. It's almost inconceivable that women didn't have, white women especially, equal rights with their white husbands, right? But coming after the Civil War and during Reconstruction, women were really treated horribly, and to the extent that they had like Mary Poppins and these other, sort of popular figures, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Frederick Douglass, who were the pioneers of the women's suffrage movement, because it was apparent that women would not be given equal footing with men. And all women really wanted to do via women's suffrage was just have the right to vote. And they were saying, look, some of us fed you guys, got on the front lines with you guys, and shot at, the competing, the other side during the Civil War. We fought the war with you. We fed you. We did everything we could to support you, and you're treating us like even less than, or at the same as if we're actual slaves ourselves. We can't even vote, and so that was a big deal. The reason why they didn't have the capacity to vote at that time was the men had already begun to read a lot of Darwin's works and findings. And they said, well, you need to have a certain amount of intelligence and intellectual capacity to vote. And according to Darwin's writings, you women don't pass the muster. You're intellectually deficient. You have an intellectual deficiency, and therefore we can't trust you to be able to vote because you're not going to even understand what you're voting for. And so this exacerbated. There was a lot more, not only just the voting thing, but men relegated women then to strictly the house, and really mistreated women horribly. I mean, the domestic violence and abuse went through the roof with Darwin's findings. So, all of the modern day mistreatment, maltreatment, women wanting equal rights, even up until the equal rights movement in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's all rooted in Darwin's findings, folks. This is where it came from. Prior to that, everybody just thought everybody was just human and everybody had the same, kind of stuff. But, this is what happened.
That's amazing. So the women's suffrage movement was in effect against Darwinism, but your average feminist women you would speak to today would not be able to draw an analogy in aligning those two things. But herein is the truth, and what the word says, the truth not only will set you free, it'll make you free. And so, Kevin's book, it outlines the truth. I had so many aha moments in the reading of this book, and I'm so thankful that you are listening in. And please spread the word. If you have a copy of this book, spread the word. If you don't have a copy, please be sure and get yourself a copy of this book. It's a real eye opener, and it's a great tool to use when you're even discussing these types of things with any of the wokesters that are out there. You might have family members like I do that are wokesters, great people and intelligent people, but they have not done their homework and don't know the history, where these things come from and who were the propagators of them, and the agenda that's associated with these thoughts and where it leads to. Let me read on here. The women's suffrage movement was significant for combating the Darwin-sponsored cultural tides onslaught toward dominance of white male patriarchy. Note, this is an exact nomenclature wokesters invoke today while wholly supporting Darwinism. But I digress. A prominent leader in the suffrage movement was Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony had an earnest desire to see women simply become equal in stature and influence to men. She worked tirelessly to help illuminate the rigors and woes of all women, and in doing so, she also became a beacon of light and hope for Black women who were raped, abused, and treated as mere property as a result of being enslaved. There were many Black women maligned and abused due to slavery, which led to the abolition civil rights movement and the women's suffrage movements to align closely. Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony became friends and colleagues as it became ever more apparent that abolitionist goals and women's suffrage goals aligned as primary human rights goals. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a big fan of Frederick Douglass. I know you are as well, Kevin. Maybe many of you listeners are fans of him as well, but to see how he understood the times that he was in, and so not only was concerned with quote unquote Black issues and equal rights, but also the plight of women as well. And I would say that's just good old fashioned compassion right there. Let me read on.
Should I say just one comment about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of people are really surprised that the pioneers of the women's suffrage movement included a man, Frederick Douglass. So he actually was right in there with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and himself. They were simpatico. They worked together tirelessly to get this thing done. But he was there from the beginning of the women's suffrage movement.
Kevin, here's something I wanted to put forth and get your comments on, because I know you know this, that oftentimes those who are proponents for women's rights want to blame the Bible for why women were subjugated into second-class citizenship, to use as a term, when in fact, when I read the word, I don't see that. And when I look at what you've purported in this book, it really shows who the real culprits were. It was not the word of God. It was not the Bible. It was an agenda put forth by those who had another agenda about what they wanted to do as it relates to society. And I call them the anti-God crew, because they want to destroy what God has set up as this natural lines of demarcation between what is a man and what is a woman, and how should we function today in society. It wasn't the Bible that pushed against that in women's rights. It was these individuals. Would you agree, Kev?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the Bible is clear about men and women were created equal, but they had different roles. So what God was positioning for people, for humankind, for His creation, was an ideal for the ideal circumstances to be able to have a God-fearing, God-honoring household, children, and community. This is the roles that are most healthy to build that. But it was clear that men and women were created equal. I mean, it was no. He never said, "Look, I didn't, I took a little bit off, with the women when I created them." So so the modern day demarcation between men and women have all come from uh, quote unquote scientific minds who have made the division more, who have come up with these theories to make the division more apparent. And it's to them that we should be, really have a significant amount of disdain towards, not God.
Amen.
Jump in here. I want to, Kevin, I want you to pivot. This is such a good time for you to pivot about your book on the war on women. I pinned it to the top, and I just want to read this section off the cover. It says, "This book is written to help lift the veil on the truth. The truth about the war on women helps circumvent feelings of being misled and manipulated into believing something that is assumed and or false. In the end, my hope and prayer is the road is ingested and appropriately critiqued, as this read is ingested and appropriately critiqued, as is overlaid anew onto personal ideologies and life journeys. McGarry hits a home run with this one. This book is breathtaking, illuminating, and compelling, while at the same time exhaustive and incredibly insightful. It's a must read for everyone fighting for and concerned about the plight of women." Now, you wrote this book in 2020, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what prompted you, to actually come and write this book, and give us a little synopsis. It's a good place for that.
Yeah, good. So I was here. So, actually with the, past president, we had a lot of, hysterical moments with women's marches, to the extent that women would wear these hats that were shaped like anatomy, and just be really, really grotesque and vile and abusive about their views on those things. And I thought, well, this is really interesting, because they're declaring that there's a literal war on women and womanhood and womanhood. And so I really felt, I can only write when the Spirit gives me unction to do so. So I really felt the Spirit saying, yeah, I need you to write on this, because there is a literal war on women. Now, I didn't really understand what that meant until the inspiration actually came from Genesis 3:15. And a particular few translations in Genesis 3:15 says, "And there will be war between you," and this is God speaking to the serpent, "you, the serpent, and the woman and her offspring." Other translations saying there will be enmity, so perpetual chaos, enmity, war, if you will, between Satan and woman and her offspring. But that was the real sort of genesis of the idea. Like, wow, there is really seriously a war. It's not the cultural context that they're trying to paint today, but this is really something that started way back in the Garden of Eden, and it started because the enemy wants to come against God and all of His creation. It just so happens that all of creation must be born, all of humankind must be born of a woman. And so obviously that would be his target. And so it always has been. and it always will be. That's sort of the genesis of spiritual warfare. It's directed, it's purposeful. It starts, at the womb, right, with the child, the woman, and it's carried forth from there. And so this book really goes through connecting all the dots with history from Genesis 3:15 all the way through to our modern day, and connects all the dots, including it does deal with feminism, radical feminism, women's suffrage, child sacrifices, Moloch and Baal child sacrifice, all that kind of stuff. And then it brings it all the way to modern day, intersectionality, CRT, and all of the other sort of cultural theories that are bandied about today, and how they're all part of the same war, this literal war of humankind, literally the spiritual war between good and evil. So I don't know if that says it enough. Or is there more you want me to say on that, Regina, or is there something in particular?
No, I think it was just a good spot for you to introduce the book to people, and that, the conversation about the war on women is not new.
Yeah.
And the idea that, socialists have said now that there's this war on women, well, not socialists, excuse me, that our communities are voiced. There's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Everything started back with evil in the Garden of Eden.
That's right.
So from the very day, there was a war on women.
Yes.
And I think we need to not be distracted by the people and the individuals, especially as people of faith. We should understand that evil has always been around. It will continue to always be around, and it will continue in any way that it can to destroy women. And so as we see this, we might want to blame a social group or our culture, but we need to understand that evil is in this world.
Yes.
And that's really, and there's no way for that to happen. I mean, for it to be resolved except by the children of light of God understanding who we are and standing up. And a major daughter asked a question. She wanted to know, what does that war look like? Now, major daughter's in South Africa, so her culture and worldview is a little bit different than Western, but that still doesn't mean that there aren't problems with war on women. So Kevin, if you could give some points on really what does a war on women, what does that look like now?
Yeah, good question. So on women directly, it looks like women being, really being relegated to in certain societies, and even to a certain extent here, a lot of women are not given proper treatment. They're not treated as equals. There's a lot of domestic violence. There's a lot of human trafficking, sex trafficking. Very rarely, it does happen, but very rarely is it sex trafficking of men or young men. Most sex trafficking, probably 90+% or more, are women or young girls. This is the demonic realm's way of really going after women in the way that God himself prophesied it would be in Genesis 3:15. There is real hatred and enmity for all women. The demonic realm hates them because that's where humanity is born. Every time a human is born, the demonic realm is agitated, because that means there's more people now that have the potential of being children of light. And that is not, part of the war strategy is to eliminate that, or to significantly decrease it, or to permanently prevent God's creation from being able to be brought forth. And so the other part of it is abortion. Just reported yesterday in Life News that we had more abortions last year than I think that's any other year that they've taken. 44 million plus around the world. This is worldwide. This is an estimate too, a global estimate. Obviously, when it comes to closed societies like China and North Korea, you're not going to really know. But according to some estimates, 44 million babies. So that's the strategy. Look, if I can jack up women, confuse them to the extent that they even think that they're men, confuse them to the extent that they don't even want to have children, confuse them to the extent that they don't even know what a woman is. They won't even say what a woman is now. Confuse them to the extent that they actually, they actually support and encourage trans over themselves as women. Then, hey, I've shut them down. And then for those that want to have babies, I confuse them to the extent that I have them destroy their babies. Confuse them to the extent that it's actually, it's good. It's enlightened to destroy your baby in the womb. These are the ways that the demonic realm have really wreaked havoc on the woman and her offspring, as prophesied in Genesis 3:15. And there's many more ways. You have prostitution, you have, and I'll cover all of those in that book. So all of that is participating in a demonic realm's way of trying to undermine the sovereignty of God and his creation.
And something else that I don't think is as prevalent in other nations as we see it here in America, but this whole transgender situation that's happening, where some states are removing the word woman from the dictionary, where, the bathrooms now, men who are women are, we've heard about competing in women's sports, totally just tipping the balance of what women have access to do. And so it's this real transgender. You really see a lot with the men transgendering to women who are really fighting. It's not the women who are trying to be male. It's the men. And so we still see this thing of trying to break down everything that makes a woman.
Yep.
With this transgender movement.
Yep.
And so now if men can go into women's bathrooms, there's no boundary for them anymore. There's no safety for them anymore. They are not even treated the same. And it begins to, I think that's when it really hit me, is seeing when I saw some news articles where certain states were redefining what the word woman meant, and men were arguing that they can be pregnant and have a baby. And it's just like, you hate us so much that you are now trying to completely destroy our existence, so that, we're no longer in an encyclopedia. We're no longer in a dictionary, that people are questioning what is a woman.
That's it. That's exactly right. To the extent, let me just give you some additional data points here. To the extent that, to your point, they're taking women out of dictionaries, they're putting in birthing persons, right? So now birthing persons. Men are claiming that they can have a menstrual period, so they're stuffing their backside orifice with tomato juice and trying to feign having, a period type of a agony. This is unbelievable. This is really psychotic. Then you have even in California, if you get arrested for any reason, you say that you're trans, they will put you in a women's prison, a women's holding cell, or a prison. And we've had multiple instances of women prisoners being impregnated by these quote unquote purported trans people. So it's really, really gotten to a point where it's horrible what's happening to women right now.
Yes, I heard about that. And there's this whole movement now about the violation of human rights because women in prison are not even safe.
That's right.
Because now they're being raped by fellow prisoners.
Right.
Not even just impregnated, but raped in a way that, only a man can rape you.
Right.
That's and the human rights violations that are happening in the penal system because transgendered men are in there now.
Yep.
It's just unbelievable. Major Daughter asks, what role is feminism playing in this war? If you could remember, her worldview of this is different than what we understand.
Sure. So the role that feminism is playing, unfortunately, feminism has laid the way for women to sort of congregate around this idea that women are meaningful, that women are useful, women are purposeful, women are to be esteemed as equals. But today's feminists are actually playing a role for the trans movement. It is unbelievable what's happening. So the feminist movement have gone all in on trans. The feminist movement, quote unquote, are actually saying, yes, these biological men can and should participate with women's sports and take those scholarships away from those young ladies, those young girls, and fully participate in women's sports, canceling really the effect of great athletes, women, because now they're competing against biological men. The feminist role is actually encouraging more and more destruction of the womb, destruction of babies. The feminist role is encouraging more and more permanent, unfortunate sterilization by way of the chemical abortions being pushed more and more and more. The womb doesn't know the difference. So if you have 5 or 6 chemical abortions over time, when you do really want to have a child, it's going to be very, very difficult. We're hearing all kinds of horror stories about some young girls who have had both physical and chemical abortions. Some in New York City, for instance, as many as 18. And so when they want to get married in their late 20s and 30s, their body it just gives up. They can't procreate. So these are the ways that the feminist movement are actually working against womanhood today. It's horrible what the feminists are not doing. And so we need mighty men, men and women, but we need women of God to stand up and to push back against this because it is destroying what it means to be a woman. And so those are just some examples. There's many, many more, but I don't want to belabor this. But anyway.
No, I think that's good, Kevin, because, something else that when you were speaking it reminded me that it's almost like the feminist movement got backed into a corner once transgender became an issue.
Yeah.
Right? Because feminism has always been fighting that a woman is as good as a man. Right. And so now when these men want to become women, what do you do as a feminist? Right. You can't back down now. Right. You've been fighting all this time that we're equal. And so now you have men saying, yep, I want to be equal. I want to be just like you. And so it's that affirmation of I want to be you so much that let's support each other, right? And so it's like now my enemy's enemy is my friend.
Wow.
And they are backed into a corner where they can't retreat. They've had decades fighting that women's are equal as men, right? And so what do you do now when men say, okay, well, I want to be a woman? You can't back down.
Wow.
I mean, it's like you have to go all in.
That's profound. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
I digress, Lonnie. Back to you. Sorry. You're on mute if you're talking, Lonnie. Lonnie, are you there? Okay, Kevin, can you hear me?
I hear you fine. Yeah, it looks like Lonnie just heard you. Yeah.
There we go. I was stating that some of the women within the feminist movement have had to backpedal because they can see now there's a problem with this, but they're being ostracized within their movement because there's momentum built and a lot of money thrown behind this, by the way, because it has everything to do with the blurring of the lines, as Kevin and Regina have stated. I was just thinking of something. I just wanted to put this out there as I was thinking about everything that's being talked about today, is that we serve a Heavenly Father who in his very essence is a creator. He creates. That's what he does. He takes great joy in that. Satan is not a creator. He is a perverter. He can create nothing. So when I think about his angst he has against all things of God, but in particular women, it reminds him of that which he can never do. He can't create. Women and what they represent in the creation of life, as God's defined them as being the providers of life once man has provided the seed, it shows Satan every time he sees a woman, and I think Kevin alluded to this, who has children. It's a reminder of what he can never do. So he is, to use the term, hell-bent on doing what he can to destroy that natural order that God set up, that in fact reflects who and what God is as a creator, and hence this attack on women. It's truly scary when you see it, you watch. I see it on TV. I can hardly watch TV anymore because you see representations of it in just about all of the programming that exists today. Women are just as good as men. Women are just as good as men. Now women are better than men.
Right.
Women reflect male and masculine attributes today that, in my opinion, aren't even a part of what womanhood even is, and the power that women have in and of themselves based on how they were created, and is a complete blurring of the lines. And so we have this younger generation coming up where you have young women who, I was just reading online the other day where in their early years didn't even want to be a woman. And how do you get to that point? Well, it's what's being put forth in media today.
Yeah.
Just my thoughts. So looking at the time, and we've got I've got a little bit of time left. Regina, would you like me to read some more from Kevin's book, or as we're just delving into Karl Marx?
I'd love to hear what any of the listeners may have, other participants would have to say, if there's anyone who would want to come up.
Yeah, and if you're on, I think we have 2 people listening on YouTube. If you want to put a comment in, we'll be glad to read it. And I do know that our guests, I have sent them invitations and they're not able to come up. But if something changes, they can just raise their hand. I think this has been, I don't know that we want to jump into Karl Marx now because we won't have time to really delve into him fully. So why don't we just, Kevin, if you've got any closing remarks, and then Lonnie, and then I'll say a few things.
Okay. So in closing, the main thing that I would love to have every listener to fully understand, and to help your friends and family members to understand as well, is if you are truly for women's rights, women being treated as equals, as human equals, if you are truly for standing against misogyny and sexism, and if you are truly for standing against toxic masculinity, quote unquote, then you have to then accept that you must stand against wokeism, Marxism, and Darwinism. It's just that simple. That's just the way it is. Now, if you're insincere and if you're unprincipled, you'll continue to believe the way you want to believe, and you're just going to go full forward. But really, your plight has been started and instigated by the ideology that you so lovingly embrace. So, let's do better. If you really are sincere, then reject it. That's the only choice. If you're a sincere feminist or you really want women to be able to come up and be women, you got to reject the progressivism, wokeism of today. That's your choice. It's still binary. I mean, you reject that, and then you embrace, God and logic and common sense. Yeah, so it's really not a hard choice. I understand that it may be a point of consternation for some, but if you're sincere, then do what's right. Do what you know to do. So that's where it is, and I hope that you got something out of it, and I hope that you'll be able to help your family, friends, and community with what you learned today.
One more question that was dropped in the chat, Kevin. What about women on women war? There's a school of thought that says the enemy of a woman is another woman. I have my thoughts on that, but I'm going to let you answer first.
Yeah. So, really fundamentally, any war, literal war or literal hostilities against women, which would, by the way, and I cover on the book, which includes extramarital relationships, because you're taking advantage of, another woman. If you take advantage of a woman in the way that you're having extramarital relationships, prostitution, and pornography, guys, this is all part of the war on women. So any of these hostilities towards women are feeding into the demonic narrative. This is what he wants. So whether it's women on women, whether it's men, doing what they do against women, that's it. That's being participating in this demonic side of the war. So that's my 2 cents on that. But you had something, Regina?
Yeah, I was going to let Lonnie go. Lonnie?
I would just add that you get the tools that will help you spread the truth about what really is taking place and who the perpetrators are. And Kevin's book, Woked Up, and certainly start there. His other book, The War on Women, From the Root to the Fruit, is another great tool to use. It'll give you as a tutorial, the munitions that you need to fight this good fight of faith and getting the truth out. Because we know the truth, it not only makes us free, it sets us free. And otherwise, the false narrative will continue to gain momentum, and women will be further exploited as they are today. And the other team, the anti-God team, will win, and certainly in this current battle that we're fighting. So that's what I would suggest.
So first, to the question about women and women fighting, any way that there can brought into anything that should be unifying is going to happen, right? I mean, we get married and we make these covenants, man and woman, and it's holy, it's ordained by Elohim, and there's always division. There's always something coming against the marriage, coming against the family. And so there is no vessel that is immune from being overtaken, if you will, by fighting in this war. So whether you are a male or a female, I don't think the vessel matters as much because it's still about destruction of the female. And so if I were evil, I would make sure that there was no safe place for a woman to go. Right. And even if you think about just marriage counseling and how the divorce happens because they lose trust for one another, because they can't communicate, because they have different expectations. And so interrelationship problems are common in humanity. So whether your sisters or your best friends or your family members or co-workers, the attack is and the war is, according to Genesis, that war with the woman. So if I were evil, I would always make sure that woman had no safe place to go. And that would be also including, other women. And yet, those who are in lesbian relationships would tell you that's the safest place for them. So there's a lot of mixed up emotions and things that evil has done to perpetrate lies and frauds, but it's all about dividing what it is that Elohim had set in order. And so whatever way he can do that, I see that evil is going to do that. And so the war on women will come from any vessel possible. Any vessel that will submit itself can be used. So I don't think that women should think that other women are exempt from being, in war with them. I'm sorry, I didn't know if you could hear me. I moved my mic. I was saying I don't think that there's any vessel, that can be exempt from being in this war against women. Thank you, Major Daughter, for all your excellent questions. She is an interviewer and a reporter and a TV news broadcaster. She's just awesome. Awesome, awesome. Okay, we are going to close out. We thank you, everyone, for joining us today on our discussion. When we pick back up next week, we'll continue this conversation, but we'll get into a little bit more with Marx and move on. And so we're going to close this room. I hope you've got a chance to download the link on the War on Women. You can buy that on Amazon. And this room will be closing in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.